Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. From the outset, I want to warn people that I'm going to make a bold, if not inflammatory assertion later in this morning's briefing. I'll be sure to give you fair warning before I say it, but I think it's an idea that needs to be expressed. Now, before you can erase a people, the first thing you have to do is to erase their reputation. You have to either claim that everything they ever did was bad, or that everything they ever did was actually done by someone else. You have to make it clear that that group has no value, they are valueless, they've contributed nothing, and that other people did things because this group was incapable of doing it themselves. For several months now, Brother Tariq's been fighting the good fight to combat and correct the lies being told about the origins of hip-hop. Due to how influential and globe-spanning and just how revolutionary hip-hop has been, there's been a lot of folks, many of them non-black, who have actually tried to lay claim to it. It may seem trivial to some non-thinking people to stand up for what it is that black people in this country have created, but it's no small thing at all. Now, Tariq has said that he's been working on a documentary about the origins of hip-hop so that there would finally be a definitive and accurate accounting of this unique FBA art form, and that it would finally be documented that hip-hop was not the invention of immigrants or of white people. I think that should go without saying. That it was the sole creation of black Americans, specifically black people who came out of slavery in this country. And on cue, we now have the immigrant tether, Joy Reid, who the white media is sending in to do counter-programming against this black media pushback. Joy Reid has announced that she's going to start her own so-called blog series on hip-hop that she's calling Hip Hop is Universal.
50 years ago this very month, a couple of teenagers threw a back-to-school party in the Bronx with music provided by DJ Kool Herc. That event turned out to be the birth of one of the biggest and most influential music genres of all time, hip-hop. And we at The Readout are celebrating this anniversary with a new digital series called Hip Hop is Universal to dive into how hip-hop has influenced not just today's music, but everything from our culture and our fashion to even our politics. Joining me now to explain is the Readout blog's very own Jahan Jones. Jahan, it is good to see you. Tell us what you got going. What do you have coming up on this amazing new site?
It just speaks to how hip hop really does reach all kinds of people. It began as this art form that was devised by disadvantaged Black and Latinos in the Bronx, and it has versioned far beyond that. And as I say in the article, it has become an art form that a lot of people want to cling to, a lot of people want to pick from. And, you know, even a lot of people who are not Black, who are not Latino, have been able to water it in their own right as well. And so this is just an opportunity for us here at The Readout to celebrate the legacy of hip hop.
Well, with a title like that, they're not even being subtle about it. Why not just call it Hip Hop is for Everyone? Because that's what Joy Reid's doing. I mean, you can tell some white folks put those words in her mouth and told her to say that. See, FBA people are attacked all over the world. We are a persecuted people, the only persecuted people on earth. Oh, and just for the record, that's not the bold, inflammatory statement that I'm going to be making. That comes later, just to give you some idea of the fire that's about to drop. Everyone loves to join in on attacking us and denigrating us and saying that black people are the problem, black Americans are the problem, and yet these exact same people love to pounce on every single thing that we create, and before you know it, they're claiming that they made it, or that they somehow had something to do with it. When other groups make something or introduce something, that's always regarded as their thing. They're allowed to have cultural proprietorship over it. But every single time that black Americans, specifically FBA, make something, everyone's able to lay claim to it. It's community property. All of a sudden, there is no originator of it, and even if there is, well, that doesn't matter. It should belong to everyone. They hate the creators, but they absolutely adore what we create. Well, that doesn't make sense, and we're not going to allow it. This is Joy Reid trying to sneak in Tethers by the side door and to bestow legitimacy on herself, because that's what this is really about. And it's not hard to see the hand of the white media behind this. Since the dominant society doesn't have an actual claim to having started hip-hop, what we have is their white media trying to use their own massive platform to bestow legitimacy on the idea that, well, those FBA people, they didn't create hip-hop either. This is how you miseducate the public. Tethers are a very important part of maintaining white supremacy because they are the black faces who will claim to be part of the black community, and yet every word out of their duplicitous mouths repeats and argues every one of white power's lies. And the white supremacists will point to their Tether operatives and claim that they must be telling the truth because after all, why would our bought and paid for sellouts lie? Hip-hop is not universal. It didn't come from all the world. You don't find versions of hip-hop having originated from all over the planet. You can say that music is universal, but you cannot say that hip-hop is. Because if hip-hop was universal, why was it that these other groups tried to stomp it out of existence? If they had their way, there wouldn't be any black people, and there wouldn't be any hip-hop either. If it was up to these other groups, everything black people have created wouldn't be allowed to exist in society, and neither would we. It was only because we outfought and outthought all these enemies of the black community that we continue to exist, and what we create continues to exist. And these other groups are able to culture vulture off of us. We, black Americans who came out of slavery in this country, are the heartbeat and the pulse of American culture, and much of the world's culture. I also considered it perversely amusing that Reid made it a point to name drop Kool Herc and say that some back-to-school party was the birth of hip-hop. Now, I'm not going to get off into the weeds about picking apart the details of that, but let me just go ahead and say one thing that shouldn't be controversial because it's just a basic fact. Kool Herc was not the result of Jamaican culture, because if he was, then there would have been hip-hop all over Jamaica. But there's not, and there wasn't. You can't find it anywhere over there. Meanwhile, in the U.S., you can find all the elements of hip-hop already in existence and already in widespread use long before Kool Herc ever started doing after-school parties. All of the elements and building blocks of hip-hop were already in existence and already widespread throughout the U.S. by black American society long before his folks even got to the U.S. The rhyming, the dancing and floor work, the slang and vernacular, all of it perfected and widely adopted throughout the black community. But you know where it wasn't adopted at? In Jamaica or in Africa. While I don't take away from the work that Kool Herc put in, we have to be bluntly honest. He didn't invent those foundational elements. He jumped on a bandwagon that had already been rolling for decades before his folks even got to the U.S. Now, if you want to call him a hip-hop artist, that's fine. Nobody says that he wasn't. If you want to say that he had been part of the hip-hop scene, that's fine. Nobody says that he wasn't part of the movement. But there's a difference between being part of a movement and being the originator of the movement, which is a lie that Joy Reid's trying to push. It's a lie to claim that Kool Herc was the beginning of it. He came along later as part of a cultural and musical movement that had already been in motion several years earlier. And by the way, for the sake of argument, even if you want to say that Kool Herc was indeed the undisputed originator of hip-hop, cultural movements and art forms almost never have one person who is solely responsible for it. It's usually groups of people, and they play off of each other. But let's go ahead and say that he was. That's not why Joy Reid is trying to make this guy an issue. She's using this as a way to piggyback in a larger point that she wants to make, one that has almost nothing to do with hip-hop. Joy Reid is deliberately trying to misinform people because for her, this message is about replacing the FBA community and the political disruption that we represent with compliant tethers like herself, who aren't going to cause white power any problems. And they will be allowed to lay claim to our history and to our accomplishments, to our struggle, our culture, and ultimately to our influence and our place and impact in the world. Already you got people like Joy Reid, whose folks didn't get here until the late 60s, talking about the civil rights movement as if they were part of it. Kamala Harris tried that mess too. So did Barack Obama. His father was from Kenya, his mother was from Kansas. Neither one of them was involved in civil rights anything. Although some of the people in Barack Obama's family were slave owners. No surprise. But this is what's been happening. We've been having a lot of these black immigrants coming over here, and they've been saying we when talking about the civil rights movement. They've been saying we when talking about fighting for integration. Mistake though it was, we did do it. And when talking about these cultural art forms that we create, they start using the word we. When talking about slavery, they say we. People who didn't get here until dang near 1970 saying we when talking about that. That's what's going on here.
It just speaks to how hip hop really does reach all kinds of people. It began as this art form that was devised by disadvantaged Black and Latinos in the Bronx, and it has burgeoned far beyond that. And as I say in the article, it has become an art form that a lot of people want to cling to, a lot of people want to pick from. And, you know, even a lot of people who are not Black, who are not Latino, have been able to water it in their own right as well.
They will say hip-hop is for everyone, and that's going to open the door for white power to come in and claim that white people created it. Same way that you got white people saying that they created jazz. Because just like with hip-hop, white power banned jazz in the beginning. They claimed that it was a passing fad. They demonized those who performed it, claimed that it was tearing down the culture. It had a deleterious and horrible cultural influence because those Negroes, everything those Negroes make destroys the culture. White power tried to stomp jazz out of existence. And when that failed, they tried to co-opt it. And they're still trying to legitimize the lie that white people had something to do with the creation of jazz, when in reality, they were the ones who tried to kill it. And with hip-hop, we see them rinsing and repeating the same strategy, only this time getting black faces to sell the soap for them. Hip-hop is for everyone, including the white supremacists who spent every day of the last 50 years attacking it. MTV didn't even want hip-hop to be shown because those racists over there, they didn't like it. So is hip-hop for them too? No, it's time for us to start exercising some aggressive cultural proprietorship of our own and start doing some heavy gatekeeping. People won't like that because they've been spending the last 150 years, especially the last 50 or so years, just running roughshod over us. Hell, they don't even have to ask permission to come in and put their hands on whatever it is that we make. They just walk up and do it. Well, they better get used to having to have a hands-off policy now because this is going to be the new normal. We have to stop allowing any and everyone to elbow their way into our party, to gang rape what we create, then leave it on the side of the road for dead because they think that they killed it. And just in case their attacks and their bludgeoning and their attempted cultural rape fails to kill what we created, they will then try to co-opt it, which is basically prostituting our culture, putting it on the street corner to be sold to strangers, and they'll try to make a few bucks for themselves off of what we made. That's what they try to do. They try to kill it. If that fails, gang rape it, and if it still doesn't die, we'll see if we can go ahead and put a chain around his neck and put it on the street corner. Tell him make some money for us. People like Joy Reid and the white media propping her up, they don't know anything about us, and truth be told, they have nothing but contempt for us. So it's to their advantage to lie. They want to erase what we've done and put themselves in our place. It's like when you have lies like Rick Rubin, or whatever that clown's name is. Every time a white person talks about the early days of rap music, they always try to shoehorn Rick Rubin into the conversation. They've been doing that mess for so doggone long as a joke. White society is decades behind the black cultural trends. White people find out about things decades after we made it, and after we have been refining it and expanding it. With rock and roll, you got people like Jerry Lee Lewis and others and Elvis. They're supposed to be seen as some sort of trendsetters. Black folks had rock and roll long before these white folks even knew that it existed. But when white people tell the story where there was a white guy who liked it, so basically he was one of the founders of rock and roll. They do that mess all the time. It's one of white supremacy's favorite tricks that when it comes time to try to rewrite our history, they claim that whatever we created didn't exist until they discovered it. They always try to do that mess. Year zero starts as soon as these white supremacists see something. Well, it didn't exist until we discovered it. We were there right at the beginning of it. That's the lie that they tell. It didn't exist until they saw it. And how much you want to bet that Joy Reid and her pals will make sure to talk to posers like Busta Rhymes and other immigrants so that they can all say that hip-hop was from Jamaica or some other pack of lies. This is not about telling the story of hip-hop. This is white media counter-programming. And by the way, just for the record, I'm curious if anybody can tell me who the rapper or rappers were at Kool Herc's alleged birth of hip-hop party. I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine hip-hop without a rapper, so does anybody remember who the rappers were who were at this after-school shindig that he was the DJ for? I'm just asking for a friend. Look, I'm sorry to have to break it to you, but the Kool Herc created hip-hop line, it's largely an urban myth, mostly pushed by white people in the white media who don't know any better and don't care to begin with. Too many times we've allowed our history to be written, or rather rewritten, by everyone else, and then we spend, or rather waste years, if not decades, trying to clean up the mess afterwards. These attempts to graft a non-FBA identity onto the things that we create, to take the first non-FBA person in the room or on the other side of town and elevate them as the creator of it, this is how these myths take root. But this isn't about actually telling the story of hip-hop. What Joy Reid's doing is trying to forward a lying narrative that black people didn't build America. Immigrants built America. That's the actual narrative she's trying to push. This way, Joy Reid can point at herself and say, I built hip-hop. I built America. This is a cultural appropriation double whammy that she's attempting to pull. First, tell a lie about hip-hop and claim that people who just arrived in the U.S. created it, when not one element of hip-hop existed in the places where these folks came from. And then after that, just repeat it nonstop until people believe it. Why is there this never-ending holy war to erase what we have done? It's because we are the greatest single threat to white supremacy, and those non-white groups who think that they found a comfortable place under it. We threaten all of them. First of all, we are the proof that this country is not a moral nation. It is a moral fraud. It is the evil empire. We are the living proof of that, and it's undeniable proof. No immigrant, even immigrants from Africa or the Caribbean, can say that. They can't erase that slavery happened in this country, and the reprehensible racist oppression that we have endured every day ever since. They can't erase the civil rights movement or the countless injustices that we have endured. So instead, what we see is white power bringing in tethers like the William Allen clown down in Florida, who will just outright lie and say slavery wasn't so bad. In fact, it was actually a good thing for black people. And they bring in people like Joy Reid to say that immigrants created all that stuff that you keep attributing to those black folks who came out of slavery in America. Well, actually, all those cultural touchstones that those FBA folks made, it was actually immigrants who did it. So you really don't need those people from slavery. You just get rid of them altogether. I mean, what did they ever contribute? This is about replacing the disobedient and rebellious FBA contingent in this country with a compliant, subservient group of tethers. And then these tethers will lie through their teeth and claim that they were enslaved in the U.S. and that they were the civil rights generation, when most of them, from Obama to Kamala Harris to Joy Reid to Notorious B.I.G. to Busta Rhymes, didn't even get here until after the civil rights movement was over. And the white media will allow them to tell these lies because they won't threaten the status quo like we're doing. This is a racial political operation you're watching take place. You know what sickens me about these tethers and these black immigrants who attack us and try to lay claim to our history? They don't even need to do dirtbag moves like this in the first place. They would be better off if they simply told the truth. By acknowledging what we've done and that they learn from us, they would actually be legitimizing themselves. This is where we get to the really bold, if not inflammatory assertion that I hinted at earlier. See, the Europeans were the slaves of the Romans, and they had absolutely nothing to do with ancient Greece either. But those northern Europeans who were being enslaved by the Romans and ignored by the Greeks, they claim both Greece and Rome as part of their cultural heritage, as part of their cultural history, and even their cultural inheritance. These black immigrants, they ought to be looking at us the same way. Now, I hope you'll forgive the comparison, family. We certainly are not like the Greeks nor the Romans, but bear with me. We are to these Africans and the Caribbean blacks what the Greeks and the Romans are to the Europeans, a separate, different people whose cultural accomplishments and ideas laid the path whose footsteps the Africans and the Caribbean people would come to follow. Be it our style of dress, to how to express ideas, we see that they take their cues from us, which they do. Busta Rhymes is not an FBA, neither is Kool Herc or Joy Reid. They can't claim to have broken the chains of slavery. A number of them brag that their ancestors were never slaves. They cannot lay claim to the legal, social, or cultural contributions we made, or the unbroken 500-year legacy of resistance to oppression that we represent. They can claim to be the beneficiaries of the things that we did. They can, at most, and I'm being very loose with that word here, they can at the very most claim that they're carrying on our cultural legacy in their own way. But what they cannot and will not be allowed to claim is that they were the ones who made what we created, that they were the ones who did what we accomplished. If they were intellectually honest, that's what they would do. And my question to them is, why not? You're already imitating everything that we do, how we dress, how we carry ourselves, the kind of analogies that we make. You guys are doing carbon copies of what we do. What shame is there in admitting that the people who have come to exemplify black identity in the world were your teachers and you take your cues from them? They were your inspiration. What shame is there in black people acknowledging that they were inspired by other black people? These other groups acknowledge who taught them what. But when it comes to us, we have the people who we taught, the people who had to learn at our knee, the people who we had to sit them down and give them the game because they didn't have the game. Those people have the nerve to turn around and claim that they taught us. See, this is what happens in the Caribbean and in Africa. Places where the backstabbing and the throat cutting are out of control, so they don't respect each other. They routinely try to take from one another. Their loyalty system has been completely and thoroughly destroyed. They figure that because it's natural and commonplace to co-opt what other people have done over there, then we shouldn't have a problem with it over here either. You take from someone else and then claim that what you took had been yours all along. And that's a huge part of the reason why they don't call this stuff out in their home countries. Because how can you when everybody's doing the exact same thing? No, they have chosen to demonize us and claim that we're the problem and to attribute negativity to anything remotely associated with us. Fine, so be it. We're going to help them out then. If we're really such a bad influence on them, then we're going to make sure they're not allowed near anything that we've made or that we've done. Our historical accomplishments are off limits, and our cultural contributions are also off limits. Now they no longer have to worry about being contaminated by the inferior influence of FBA culture. Because all of these people, including black immigrants, attack us and everything we create, they can all step off, to use a hip-hop phrase. Hip-hop has been embraced around the world. It is a uniquely powerful art form created by us. It's been adopted and used and appropriated by people all over the planet. And these are places that perpetuate and attack black people, yet they can't resist the chance to use the culture we created. We gave the world an activist vocabulary and blueprint that every group of people resisting oppression have used all over this planet. We did that. Hip-hop is the music of revolution because it appeals to the young. We took hip-hop and did what we've done with every single art form that we have created or been involved in. We made it where hip-hop was subversive. We gave it the raw power of righteous outrage so that it could challenge established power. Classical music doesn't do that. Classical music is the music of the establishment. Country music doesn't do that either. None of the music that these non-FBA groups created has caught on or been so well received or been as consequential to the rest of the world as hip-hop, as what we created. No wonder everyone wants to claim they had something to do with it. But it doesn't stop there. Hip-hop is only part of a larger pattern of FBA accomplishments that everybody else wants to piggyback onto. Everything, and I mean literally everything that people consider to be good or honorable or even remotely decent about the United States, was the direct result of our actions. Not immigrants, not even black immigrants, were responsible for it. Everything from the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which created the legal precedent that gave all these other groups, including white women, the right to vote, to the Civil Rights Movement, to the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts, to affirmative action, which was a grievous mistake, helping to lift the immigration restrictions, which was even worse, to say nothing of our cultural contributions like the Harlem Renaissance, all the way to the blaxploitation film movement, to hip-hop. All of that and so much more was the result of what we did, not any of these other groups. What we did were not the works of anyone else, and it wasn't influenced by anyone else either. They were influenced by us, not the other way around. Black people's activism gave red Indians in Oklahoma all kinds of legal rights, and they were incapable of getting on their own, and they have been racist as hell towards black people, yet no one in their community has said boo about it. Without FBA folks, you don't get a Gordon Parks or a Spike Lee. And without them, you don't have a Robert Rodriguez or any of these Asian filmmakers. Hell, they invoke us every time they want something. When we do something, everyone else is able to benefit from it because we are trailblazers. We're the only trailblazers this country has ever had. Everyone else has had to wait until we did something before they finally had a model that they could use, though usually they just went ahead and walked the path that we blazed, because our creativity and ingenuity is unmatched. Hearing this reality eats a lot of people alive. Tethers and culture vultures are reminded how puny and unimportant their own contributions were compared to the colossal, unprecedented, and still unsurpassed magnificence of the FBA community's accomplishments. And let's not forget when these black immigrants come to the U.S., their families say to stay away from us. They come over here and do everything they can to fit in with the dominant society, wearing Poindexter, corny clothing, trying to show that they're on Team Suburbia. And then when their would-be white suburban pals spit in their faces, they suddenly want to reinvent themselves as being one of us. Akon's raggedy behind has been one of the worst offenders in this regard. So while Joy Reid is busy doing blog posts trying to rewrite history, we're going to make sure that the real record is left pristine. We created hip-hop. We created every single component that went into it. We gave birth to it. We nurtured it. We innovated it. We established every forward step the art form has ever taken. Everyone else had to wait for us to do something. Then they would come along later with their own pale imitations of it. For us, hip-hop is culture because it is. It's ours. It's part of who we are. It came from us. It was an expression of our own uniqueness. For all these other groups, however, including black immigrants, hip-hop's just a money-making opportunity for them. The point is for it to be exploited and strip-mined and then left for dead when they can't get anything else out of it. Though for a lot of white teenagers, it represents a way to annoy their parents, or a way for them to feel like they're part of something uniquely American, something undeniably from the New World. So how does someone find a way to talk around this monumental and undeniable record of accomplishment? How do liars and fraudsters try to shoehorn themselves into a record they had nothing to do with? Lie, and lie big, and lie constantly. Try to drown out the black truth with white noise. There's a reason that hip-hop came from the black community of the United States, that it came from the soil, because it was the only place that it could come from. Kool Herc made a name for himself here. Yes, and he could only have done that when he was around us, the same way that another Jamaican, Marcus Garvey, was only able to get things popping when he was around us. Simply put, and I don't care who this offends, being around us elevates the brothers and sisters from the diaspora. Coming around us is how they raise their game. That's not a diss. It's a fact. And if you're from Africa or the Caribbean and that bruises your ego to hear it, why is it then that if white people say immigrants could only have the opportunities they have in America, you don't have a problem with that? Oh, if somebody tells you that you had white society who helped you up your game, you'd be all over that. See, I am part of the great American experiment. You'd be fine with that. You'd beam and strut when white society says they gave you a chance to do something. But when it comes to the people who actually fought the battles, literally, and who bled and died for the laws and social changes and policy changes that made it possible for you to even come to the U.S., much less for you to exercise any opportunities, all of a sudden you want to turn your nose up at that? Too many Negroes come to the U.S. and begin taking on the attitudes and behaviors of the dominant society, complete with culture vulturing. So let it be known, we do give credit where it's due, but we only give it to a truth, not a fault. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Moshe Ben Abraham, Frederica Moore, Brian Walton, Jasmine B., and Mike Hughes. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.